Call to order this March 15th meeting of the Board of Public Utilities, and ask for a roll call, please.
All right, Chairman Galvin, Vice Chair Arnone,
Here.
Board Member Badenfort, here. Board Member Dowd,
Here.
Board Member Grable,
Here.
Board Member Watts. Here.
So we have a quorum. Are there any statements of abstention by board members? Hearing none. We have no study sessions. We have a set of minutes from February 15th, 2018 for approval. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes will stand approved as submitted. Which brings us to our first staff briefing, 5.1, California Water Environment Association Small Facility of the Year Award. A nice one. Who's going to be presenting on this? Here we go. Hi.
Get this going here.
Got some brew, folks.
All right. Samples.
Maybe not the kind we want to drink. Good. That work? Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Vice Chair Arnone, and members of the board. This is my first time presenting for you guys. So my name is Heather Johnson, and I work in the environmental compliance section. And with me are members from Seismic. We have Pat, Ben, and Andy.
Welcome.
And we're here kind of recognizing the achievements from one of our local industries with their efforts that they have taken towards sustainability and towards water reuse. So Seismic Brewing, in case you don't know who they are, they started operations in 2017, and they brew beer. They're over on Duke Court in Santa Rosa. And they do currently I think about 2,500 barrels per year, which is like 77,000 gallons of beer during this production year. And I'm going to read to you their mission statement because it kind of gives a good overview of their business model and their ideology. So, to develop a portfolio of high-quality beers brewed and brought to market in an environmentally sustainable manner, we will be a positive, creative force within the brewing community and our local community, giving more than we take and addressing the challenges of today to prepare the way for those who follow. So I feel like that just fully represents who they are as a business. I was first introduced to Seismic when they came forward to us in the environmental compliance section with this Cambrian EcoVolt treatment system that they were proposing. Typically with breweries, we sample and we give them a surcharge billing for their BOD. And a brewery usually uses about 7 gallons of water for every 1 gallon of beer produced. And with these Cambrian units, they can do 3 gallons of water for every 1 gallon of beer produced. So it's a huge water savings. And they're treating their BODs to levels where we won't even need to sample and surcharge bill them. So right now they're able to reclaim and reuse most of their wastewater. They use it for tank cleaning, they use it for washdown, they use it for boiler feed, and that's the examples that they brought right there. So I'm not sure exactly, you want to bring them up? Yeah.
So this first sample here is coming off of our utilization tank. Second sample, once you introduce bacteria, biology into it, so it may look dirty, but it's actually cleaner. And then this is coming off of our RO. So
They may not come back to you full.
Wow.
So, I mean, you can see how clean that water is. I drank it. It's just great water that they can use. They can't use it to brew beer yet, but they can use it in almost all the other processes. So on top of that water aspect, they do a whole other slew of waste minimization. So we did the reclaimed water for packaging. They use kegs, which are reusable, and then they use aluminum cans, which have less waste packaging, so they don't have the glue and the labels and the lids that go with that. They have a distribution area that does a smaller carbon footprint because it's most of just Northern California at this time. They side stream their waste. So their spent grain and yeast is all collected. The yeast actually comes to the Laguna treatment plant out where I am, and it goes in our high strength waste system. And then the grains they send to a local farmer. And then something neat that they do is the bags that they use that they receive their malted barley in, they donate those bags instead of landfilling them, and the Russian River keepers, they use them to collect garbage instead of trash bags. It's pretty fascinating. So because of all of this, we nominated Seismic Brewing Company for the California Water Environment Association Facility of the Year, and they won.
Yay.
So we're really happy for them. They went down to Riverside to collect their award with my supervisor, Martin St. George. And they were pretty excited too, I think, because if you go on their Facebook page, which is where I took these from, they they took pictures with their award and the flight crew and the TSA and eating nacho things with the rental car person. So you can see they were just really, really excited to win this award. And we're really proud to have, it's our first business that we have nominated within the city of Santa Rosa that has won. And so we're excited too, and we just want to say thank you and honor them here today.
Great.
And so I don't know if you guys want to say anything or if I said enough.
No, I think you covered the big points.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly, we're proud to have you in our community as responsible examples of what we're trying to do here at Santa Rosa Water. And I think our missions are very closely aligned, and you embody what we're all trying to do. And I want to thank you for your efforts and congratulate you on your recognition. Is there any other comments? Yes.
When I read this agenda item in preparation for this meeting, I want to congratulate you. I was reminded of this happening maybe 7-8 years ago. I saw that the city in California that has the largest per capita consumption of water was Fairfield. And I thought, why in the world would that be the case? Well, you see it off on I-80 there on the right. It's the Budweiser brewery there. So it's obviously not the norm that you're doing. You're doing a great job, and I think we all appreciate it. But it's just a difference in how some businesses do work and others do work.
Anyone else comment? Chris?
Yeah, I was also really happy to see this on the agenda, both in terms of celebrating what are our sort of greatest emerging industries that really set us apart from other places in the country and the world, but also showing in terms of a business model that a triple bottom line can be achieved that really benefits the business, the community, the watershed, and the city and the planet. So that's, to me, that should be the paradigm that everyone follows, not just in a niche market for a certain, branding, target, but across the board. I think everyone in the industry can learn from this and really first decrease their water use, because let's be honest, breweries have a bad name when it comes to water consumption. And if you're cutting that in half this quickly, I think that shows a lot of promise for changing that perception as well, which is something that I'm excited about, considering how many breweries we have in Santa Rosa.
Oh, we have a lot.
So thank you.
Good. Any other comments?
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
And feel free to leave that growler that you...
Okay, well, that takes us to item 5.2, Annual Compliance Summary Report.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Noni and members of the board. I'll bring my PowerPoint up real quick. So as you're all aware, Santa Rosa Water strives to protect public health and minimize the impacts of our operations on the environment through complying with a broad range of environmental regulations that protect water, land, and air resources. And we also aim for transparency to foster public trust, and thus we're offering you this report today. So today's summary will cover 4 main areas of our operations, as shown on the slide. And I will briefly describe the applicable regulations, provide a summary of the permit violations that occurred last year, and then highlight a few things that are coming up in the near future that may impact our compliance programs. I think it's important to note that today's summary will just focus on the exceptions to our compliance program. So first, our sanitary sewer collection system is regulated by the state through a general permit that requires the development and implementation of a sanitary sewer management program. That program is formally updated and reviewed by the city every 5 years. The primary aim of the sanitary sewer management program is, of course, to eliminate sanitary sewer overflows. Our local operations division does that through properly maintaining our sewer system and through implementing an ongoing capital improvement program. The sanitary sewer management program also aims to minimize infiltration and inflow into the system in order to preserve the capacity in the system for sewage. And in 2017, there were 8 sanitary sewer overflows. All were considered minor or category 3 SSOs, as they were each less than 999 gallons, or they didn't enter a waterway, or everything was collected after the spill. The total combined volume for all of those was just over 2,300 gallons.
On these, I did want to note that I believe at least half were attributed during the fire. Obviously, things were going on. It's probably a relatively high number of our traditional history here.
3 were also a result of vandalism, and there was a grease and paper blockage, and then I think 1 occurred during a pipe patch maintenance activity. So all in all, it was a really good effort by our local operations division. The next category is wastewater treatment and discharge or water reclamation system. That program is regulated by an NPDES discharge permit and Title 22 regulations, as well as the state's general order for biosolids. Over the last year, the plant experienced 9 periods of under disinfection, during which the UV dosage dropped below the required dosage rate that's specified in our permit. The duration of that under disinfection ranged from 3 minutes to 15 minutes and totaled 70 minutes for the year. As well, during the onset of the fire in October, the plant experienced some really unstable power, and we actually had a period of no disinfection for about an hour until that stabilized. And last of significance, we did have a leak from Delta Pond, which occurred outside of our normal allowed discharge season. That leak was determined in late June. It was plugged in I think it was plugged on July 7th, and then the repairs were completed this fall before the discharge season.
I'm not going to interrupt everyone, but if I could on this one, just point you to that in the, as the budget subcommittee has seen and the full board will see today, in the sub-regional capital program, we're taking advantage of some excess reserves and recommending to move forward on a diversion project as a first phase of the UV disinfection project that would largely mitigate a good number of these events as a first step, and really giving some relief to operations. This is a very, as it stands now, difficult system to operate and maintain full compliance. So I think that will be a good move for the organization.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So air quality and emissions from our treatment plant are regulated by an EPA Title V major facility permit. Our operations must also comply with portable equipment rules from the California Air Resources Board. And the Bay Area Air Quality Management District also has a huge number of rules and regulations on top of our Title V permit that we need to comply with as well. So last year at the plant, we had 2 excursions which related to release of unabated digester gas. Normally our digester gas goes through some air conditioning equipment and then are burned in our engines to produce power. So there were 2 occasions that we had inadvertent releases that occurred during some maintenance activities. And both of those releases did result in NOVs that were issued, notices of violation that were issued by the district. The first of which we did receive a fine, which we paid $4,000, and the last one we're still waiting to hear back from the district on, on that penalty. We also have fuel storage tanks that are regulated. We need to have permit to operate those fuel tanks. The one at Brown Farm did not do its annual source testing in the year 2016, and so they did give us an NOV last year. We did conduct the source testing in 2017, so we are fully compliant with our permit to operate requirements. And we did receive a fine on that, missing that renewal as well, so that fine was $1,500. And then the last area that I wanted to cover with regard to our regulatory program is our hazardous materials and waste management at the plant. The California Department of Toxic Substances Control requires us to manage to store our hazardous materials safely and to manage our hazardous waste properly. The Santa Rosa Fire Department helps to implement those DTSC rules through their CUPA program. And last year, the fuel tank, the underground fuel tank at the plant, again, the monitoring equipment certification was slowed down due to some purchasing issues, and we did receive an NOV in November for that. But that certification was performed in, I think it was in either late October or November, so we're fully compliant with that at this point as well. So I also wanted to share about some of the emerging issues and topics that we're paying attention to. We have 2 permit renewals that are either upcoming or underway. The LTP NPDES permit, which I shared with you about a couple weeks ago, we're preparing for that. We're hoping to gain some operational flexibility in order to help us ease our tight operational constraints so that we can adjust our operations but still produce the level of water quality that's required by the regulations. The Title V permit is similar in that we are seeking some operational flexibility with regard to how we operate our emissions abatement equipment and things like that. There are 2 total maximum daily load plans and investigations that the local regional water board is conducting. The TMDLs are water quality cleanup plans in a nutshell. And so the first one that I've listed is the Russian River pathogen TMDL. You may be aware that there have been bacteria issues in the Russian River for quite some time, and the water board has issued a draft TMDL with a draft action plan that's primarily focusing on on-site treatment systems or septic tanks, but they also have a provision on testing in recycled water holding ponds. So we generally have not been required to test for bacteria in our holding ponds. So they're identifying that as a potential source. And so what we have asked them in response to their comments to go for the known bacteria sources and allow us to do some sampling and some investigation to perhaps do a phased TMDL so that they can address the known bacteria sources first. The other TMDL that we've all been waiting for is the Laguna de Santa Rosa nutrient TMDL, and we are faced with a no net loading provision in our NPDES permit as a result of the lack of a formal TMDL. We're working to find some relief on that with this upcoming Blue Ribbon panel that will be seeking an alternative compliance strategy. But we are paying close attention to the Water Board's work on the nutrient TMDL2. The other thing that's coming up is we are planning to transition our recycled water program from our NPDES permit to the state's general order for recycled water use. That will allow us to have our regulations consistent with the statewide recycled water use program. It will help us to continue to promote recycled water use. And probably most significant in a regulatory sense is that it will separate the Santa Rosa recycled water program from the Roanoke Park recycled water program. So Roanoke Park will have full ownership. We'll continue to provide them recycled water, but they'll be responsible for all of the monitoring and reporting associated with that program. And then last, contaminants of emerging concern. There was recently a pilot program done in the Russian River that was funded by the State Water Board. And the findings were, we got a briefing. They haven't issued the final report yet, but they did take a look at 12 CECs in water and wastewater effluent samples, and they looked at 20 CECs in sediment samples, and they found that most concentrations were below the recommended monitoring trigger levels, which was good news. They did have a few exceptions, pesticides primarily, and they are recommending that CEC monitoring continue. So I'm not sure what that will look like for our next permit. It's likely that our stormwater permit will be required to do some CEC monitoring and potentially also our NPDES permit for the plant too, but we are keeping a close eye on that as well. So I know that was a lot of information in a very quick, concise form. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Questions?
As I went through this presentation material, obviously the one thing, and you mentioned it briefly, and that's on the hazardous materials and waste management, and it occurred in October. I believe staff was relatively busy in October due to another incident. But what I'd like, so I think staff has been doing a wonderful job about this, but Ms. Miller, would you just give us your professional opinion about how you would rate our treatment operation as opposed to those others around the state of California? Are we good? Are we great? Are we whatever? If you can.
Well, I have very limited experience. Perhaps our director might have a broader range of perspective on that, but I do think that our disinfection process is quite old, and our operations staff has done a really fine job with really honing the operation as carefully as possible to minimize the length of those periods of under disinfection. I think that if you look at our operation and maintenance manual, they have standard operating procedures for a whole host of different processes that they need to maintain and operate. So in my view, which is very limited, I think that they're doing a really great job. But Ben, since you have other experience, perhaps you might want to weigh in.
Of course, it's hard to look at things like that. It's a good question, but in terms of apples to apples, I'd say initially that we have one of the most complicated and restrictive regulatory constructs in terms of the wastewater treatment facility I'm aware of in the entire state, if not well beyond that. And that's part of our effort that Deputy Miller noted in terms of working with the Water Board on this permit renewal to make some inroads on that. Outside of that, I'd say that the SSOs probably fit within the median of agencies. Everyone has overflows, and the entire industry has tried many times to get a better interpretation of the Clean Water Act, that one drop on the street that's cleaned up is still a permit violation, but it is. And it doesn't seem balanced or fair, but that's currently the world we live in with the Clean Water Act. In the air quality stuff, I think, in what I've seen, it's one of those areas with increasingly stringent regulations, and all agencies are doing the best we can to adapt to it. On that specifically, another item we're bringing forward in the budget is replacing our flare with a larger flare that will help with some of these unabated gas releases. The high-strength station is performing well and we're generating additional gas, but that means you need to manage it, including your backup facility operation, which is your flare. So I think, it's a bit of an iterative process catching up to the regs. I think we do really well. And so this report we called annual. You've probably annual is the first time, but what we do plan as an annual basis to bring this to you. And I think, we could perhaps, over time show the trends of performance for us in these different areas and maybe share some insight from the industry where the broader industry is as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that for the under disinfection, for a system that runs 24/7, 365, the time periods out of compliance were 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Right.
Out of 365 days. So need to be reported, need to be discussed, need to develop plans of correction, but I think the successful performances don't get monitored nearly as the excursions from performance norms. So,
Right.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Where am I? Here I am. So next we have update on the current budget process. Ms. Zanino, thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Arnone and members of the board. Today, at the request actually of Board Member Dowd, he asked that we give an update to the entire board about where we stand in the budget, just as an overview to keep you up to date on the much changing scenarios around especially the water main replacement that we're looking at. Even the presentation that was posted for you, I have some more information added to the presentation you're seeing today because new information just keeps emerging. And we want to just keep you up to date on where we stand and what we're going through before we give you a very detailed look at the study session on April 11th or April 5th. So we'll talk just briefly about the 18-19 budget overview. I want to talk about reserves a little bit because this is going to come into play this year more so than it has in the past. And then we will talk about the CIP funding scenarios that we're looking at. This year, we are trying very hard to reduce or eliminate any deficit budgeting that we're doing. Staff is working very hard to look at all line items to make sure that they are budgeting accurately, not over budgeting in areas, saving where they can. We, of course, have to manage the fire losses that we have. We are evaluating all vacancies and looking for efficiencies throughout our operation. As for the O&M budgets, we actually are looking very good with the understanding that we've had COLAs that came for staff this year and benefit increases. So water, there's actually a decrease in the fund by 3.2%. Wastewater is increasing by 3.9%, and the sub-regional budget is staying flat. So as I said, I wanted to talk about reserves a bit tonight because this is a direction that we're going with this CIP that we're going to be proposing. So we have an operating reserve, which is 15% of the operating budget. And these numbers that you see here are from June 30th of 2017. So these were the final numbers at the end of the last fiscal year or the beginning of this fiscal year. And the operating reserve was at $4,169,000, you can see. We have a catastrophic reserve of 5.75, and then we have undesignated fund balance or undesignated reserves. There have been different names that you've heard it by, but these are undesignated funds that we have, which are going to definitely be coming into play this year. On the wastewater side, we also have the 15% operating reserve. We have a rate stabilization fund. The catastrophic reserve on the wastewater side is $6.8 million. We have a state loan that we have to have reserves for. And then on that side, we have over $19 million in undesignated reserve funds. On the subregional portion, also the operating reserve, catastrophic is at 1.7. We also have a geysers reserve at 1.25. And then we have those undesignated reserves there as well. This is a balance that has been building up from all of the subregional partners, not just Santa Rosa. So as we don't expend what we've budgeted for, that money has been going into an account, which we are calling the undesignated fund balance. And then just outlining them for you again, the considerations for the use of this undesignated fund balance are appropriations to the CIP to cover those fire losses. We know that we will have some revenue loss that we are expecting, and then balancing any of the operating deficits as well. So our CIP scenarios, the biggest change for this year is preparing for the funding to pay for related fire damages. We are looking at using reserves for that. On the water side, we'll talk a little bit more detail about that, but also some transfers from existing projects. So this is the first slide that is slightly incorrect now because of new emerging information. But typically, and last year, our actual funding for CIP was $13 million for water, $12 million for sewer, and $4 million for subregional. The original plan for 18-19 was to continue with the $13 million for water, the $12 million for sewer, and then increasing subregional to $5 million. Now the new proposed, which this is $34 million, but that's now increasing, and we'll talk about that on a later slide. For water, sewer at $25 million, and then the subregional to $11.7 million. So this was the original slide that you saw. Just 2 days ago, we received information from FEMA that the project would not receive upfront or early funding. So we were originally going to plan all of our CIP fund this year for the water side using that 40% upfront funding from FEMA. The reason really for doing was that was so that we could program all of the systems with what we would like to fund for year one, and then removing things was easier than going back and trying to figure out what projects we needed to add in. We need to get all of that data input into the financial systems. And so this was the original funding plan. We'll talk about where the extra 17.2 comes from, but still that 13 million will go into it that was previously planned. We will be using 2.8 million from water contingency that sits in the CIP fund. We have the undesignated fund balance, and we are proposing to use 7.6 million of that undesignated fund balance. We want to leave a little bit. We don't want to remove or use all of that fund balance because we still have fire-related activities going on, and so we may need some of that fund balance to cover this year prior to receiving any FEMA funding back to reimburse us for all of the work that's been going on. We have the catastrophic reserve, so we are proposing to use the catastrophic reserve on the water side at 5.75, and then transfers from those lower priority projects. Now we are looking at, without that upfront funding of $49 million year one CIP funding. And basically, we will be using all of those funds we discussed, but now we will also be looking at taking additional funding from what is existing in the CIP fund now. So those projects right now that have money in them, this is obviously not something that we want to do, and it's, you know, not a fun process to go through, but we will have to look very carefully at all the projects to see where they are in their processes, which would be those best projects that we could use the funding from now, and then have some time to have that money come back from FEMA at a later time. So we'll have to take a very close look at which projects we take money from in order to continue to fund the water main replacement. And then we also will look for the possibility of loans and grants if we need to go that direction. On the wastewater side, we have the $25 million proposal this year. $5.5 million of that is directly for fire-related projects, but we've also added some additional projects since we do have that undesignated fund balance sitting there. We are luckily able to cover in this case. So we have the $12 million that we would have previously planned. We have 10.5 coming from the undesignated fund balance, and then we have some money coming from the wastewater contingency as well. On the sub-regional side, as you've heard, we are proposing and have been meeting with the sub-regional partners to discuss increasing the cash-funded CIP for the sub-regional side this year to include the UV or the diversion phase of the UV project at the plant. It is a $9 million project, but we have already funded previously $1.8 million of it, so we only need an additional $7.2 million for that. So previously planned was the 5.1, and then the reserves would cover 6.6 million of that. And the part, remembering that we only are responsible for 75% of that, the partners would pick up their share of that CIP as well. So that's really, we just wanted to keep you, as I said, informed about where we're going, what we've been going through in order to prepare for funding these big projects. There will be another subcommittee meeting on March 28th, and then you will be seeing a much more detailed look on April 5th when we do the study session. And then we will come back on April 19th to request a recommendation that we would take to City Council for the entire budget O&M and CIP. And with that, I will answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
It says questions, but I'm going to make comments. I have served as the Budget Review Subcommittee Chair a number of times on my tenure here on the board, and I would say unequivocally that this is the most complex analysis that we've ever had to be a part of. Staff and all the people who are working on it are doing a marvelous job. The cause of the problems, if you go back into this presentation, you could see that 2 days before our subcommittee meeting yesterday, there was a belief that we were going to get 40% of our benzene water system funding, which was $43 million, very quickly. And but that changed. In fact, your presentations to the subcommittee still showed that, because that's how quickly things have changed as we've gone through this. I think, as I said, the staff has been doing a marvelous job working through these details, and then they get these glitches like, oh no, we're not going to be able to do that. I think I'm very, very pleased that our rate mechanisms are not going to be hugely impacted, because thanks to this, to staff and this board and the City Council, we have some reserves to absorb the shock of this fire disaster that our community experienced in October. I think, though, that when we as the individual board members meet with our City Council members, as we plan to do, and when we make our presentation to the City Council, we should be clear in the fact that it appears that we're going to be fine this year with the modest adjustments in rates that you're seeing in this presentation today. But if the FEMA money does not come forth to us, we think is going to happen, but I think we need to be honest in that explanation that we're not packing in increases now, because there is a good chance that the FEMA money will come through. But we need to be honest and say, if it doesn't, we're going to be in a place where we're going to have to increase rates, just so that everybody is aware of it. It's not meant to frighten people, but it's a matter of trying to be honest with them and let them see what the situation really is. But we as a board should be very proud of the work the staff has done to get us to this place, and thank goodness that we put money away over years to build up the reserves that we have. because that's what's absorbing the shock at this point in the short term. My two colleagues, Board Member Davenport and Vice Chair Arnone, may want to make some comments as well. They've been working alongside of us, me and staff on these issues, so I certainly turn to them just for their comments.
Well, this is my first year on the Budget Subcommittee, and so I'm grateful that my two counterparts have such experience. And to staff, we were talking before the meeting that it's just stellar and stunning how well staff has done. We appreciate all of the glitches, the unprecedented glitches that amount to tens of millions of dollars and changes in what you can expect from day to day. So I'm curious, it was fantastic that we had the reserves. If we spend a great part of those, can you just tell us how those get rebuilt?
So the undesignated reserves aren't required to be rebuilt. However, because that's just not spending all of our budgeted money each year, and then that continues to evolve into a larger and larger undesignated balance. However, the catastrophic reserves, those do need to be returned within a 5-year period. So we would work towards hopefully receiving FEMA funding back that would help us with that. But if we had to delay that, we would have to delay that, and we would have to look at other things. We would have to look at, instead of funding a full amount of CIP, do we have to put that back in catastrophic reserves? But we really will be taking a much deeper look at that when we bring Bob Reed and his group back on board to do that long-term 10-year financial plan, and where do we go and where do we expect to replenish those reserves from if we get to that point. I think that it's very likely from the information we're getting that FEMA will be providing us reimbursement, and that of course would be the first place that money would go, would be to reimburse that catastrophic reserve before we.
I just want to comment that calling a unanticipated $17.2 million loss of early funding a glitch is a colossal understatement, and the fact that we do have the resources to cover that glitch in the first year at least is certainly a testament to operational efficiencies over the years. And I too want to recognize how complex this whole FEMA involvement and disaster relief involvement have very much complicated the budgeting process. And I've been very impressed at the committee meetings at the quality of the presentations that have been made and the efficiencies and the creativity in dealing with the existing situation. So thank you very much. Other comments? Yes.
Could you go back to slide 12? So this one, I think, is a little bit different than what no, not this one, but I guess I'm a little confused.
Oh, sorry, 12 is probably different on mine.
No, this is the one I was referring to.
This is the one? Okay.
So can you explain, it says 31.5 million for the total proposed for year one, but then 43 for the water main replacement. Is 43 not in the first year, the 43 million?
No, the 43 million is the estimated amount, keeping in mind, though, that we have not selected the project yet. So they are still continuing their investigation. They will still determine what the project will be with that investigation, but we needed to plan for a worst case scenario, which would be full replacement with a different material. And so that's what we've been looking at, is making sure that if that is the direction that we have to go, then we need to be prepared for that. So it was 31.5 is the total year one funding, including some other projects, and the $43 million main replacement, but it was the decrease of the 40% of 17.2 million that we were hoping to receive.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Any other questions or comments? Yes. Board Member Grable.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for working on this so hard on the subcommittee and on the staff. I have a couple of questions. One, on the FEMA funding, why is it only 40% funded through FEMA?
Originally, that is what we were told we could get as early funding for a project. It's not the full funding for a project, but it would be early funding that would come in the, I believe, public assistance portion of the FEMA funding. It has been, at least the newest information we have is that we don't fit, the water main doesn't fit in that early funding. So it would be later funding that would come to us instead, but it was never just 40%. That was just the amount of early funding that would come to us.
Okay, so it's still overall within that 90-10 or 75-25, whatever. Do we need to send Dick to Washington to? Everybody's doing it.
We are working on refining what our match will be.
Right.
Those are continuing questions that we're having.
And as the couple questions on that, so here it says 17.2 requested from FEMA, but then in the wastewater we have another 5.5 million in fire-related projects, which would bring it to 22.7 million.
Those would be totally separate projects submitted, not just, so the 43 million is just for the water main. The other projects will be submitted for the lift stations and the damage on the wastewater side.
On the wastewater side, even though those are geographically disparate projects. Got it. Not within the same perimeter as the benzene issue is what you're saying. Okay, that makes sense. More paperwork. And then I guess my other question is, do we have any sense, if we need this funding from FEMA, the early funding especially, to be able to offset any kind of, basically using up a huge chunk of our reserves? What are the timeline scenarios that you've been told? And then second of all, it does our worst case scenario. How did you put that together with, with the contingencies being moving targets? Can you just explain that process a little bit in terms of, we haven't determined the overall scope of that benzene issue and what, the geographic limitations on that system replacement are yet. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So our CIP team, the engineers in our CIP teams at the city who are in transportation and public works, they have been working to determine the cost and come up with estimates for how much it would be for the worst case scenario project that we would have to do in that area up in Fountain Grove. And so that's what we base all of that estimate off of right now, knowing that we haven't actually selected the project yet.
With DPW involved in that. Okay.
Yeah.
On the, a lot of outstanding questions that we are working towards. Specifically, you're being contacted, you've been contacted, or you will be contacted about a joint council BPU meeting we're working to set up on March 27th to have the opportunity to share in much more detail with the BPU and council and get some comments, direction, of course, sharing it with the public. We believe it'll be a very well-attended meeting. And from that, continue our discussions with FEMA. So where it stands now is, the best we understand it is the 40% expedited funding path that does exist with FEMA is only for debris removal and kind of early emergency actions. So permanent repairs like this, as we understand it today, which is different from what we understood last week, not for lack of questioning, meaning, I'm not trying to be cryptic, but it could change again because it does seem to be a bit of a maze. Nonetheless, I believe it's probably accurate. We will not get early funding for this project. So, but we do at this point expect, but we can't absolutely count on FEMA funding any of it, because they do need to confirm project eligibility generally, but then also as it ties into the repair that the city will be moving forward with. We already had the initial meeting with FEMA on project eligibility. Staff wrote, I thought, a very considered technical memorandum that we shared with FEMA and will be sharing with the BPU and the council on the 27th, outlining the response to the question of, was this incident, is this issue directly attributed to the fire? Right, exactly. But instead of just saying what we felt, we took 5 pages to give it a technical response. And then continuing to work with them on the second step, that they support the project we'll be putting in place to address this. And because of the size of it, that's going to take, it seems, quite a while to get the final determination from FEMA, likely well beyond the wrap-up of this budget. So from a cash flow standpoint, I do believe we need to anticipate moving forward with this project in the absence of FEMA funding, hopefully prior to a notice to proceed to a contract. We have a good feel that the money will be coming in, or at least greater confidence to repopulate our reserves that will be depleting to some extent.
And my question related specifically to the timeline, the anticipated timeline of that, based on, I mean, we have a consultant that's representing the city in that sense, don't we, in terms of determining those timelines and FEMA reimbursement, Cal OES backstop, all that kind of, haven't we retained counsel, a Texas firm for that?
So the city has brought on Ernst & Young to support us in the FEMA process, really in 2 places. One is ensuring, because where communities get hit from FEMA, the auditors come in 4 years after and know this piece of paper isn't signed, or this doesn't exist, or this contract didn't include everything FEMA requires, and projects get tossed aside. So I understand they're being very helpful on that. And then they're also helping us, they do have a couple ex-FEMA folks on board, helping us navigate. Of course, like any good bureaucracy, the rules change frequently, so there's, you know, some marginal benefit there. But there's a tremendous amount of work trying to understand this and navigate it. But it does feel, at this point, where we are in the budget and the timing with FEMA, from a cash flow standpoint of moving this project forward, it really is, how does the enterprise fund it, with the expectation, hope, however we want to look at it, that the FEMA funds will backfill that at a later date.
Years from now?
But I'd say it is, you know, based on what I'm hearing, if it goes quick, it could be a couple years.
So, and that's the nature of my comment specifically, is just trying to really assess those timelines realistically, you know, with, you know, some real clear-eyed, you know, reality check on that, because I know that Northridge, for instance, just finished their last, I mean, I think that just closed out with their FEMA paperwork and contract. I mean, that was worst case scenario, I hope, but, you know, with regard to that, and also with regard to our reserves and other opportunities for grants and backstops, I don't know if OES or the Water Agency or other, you know, there's other backstops that we can, you know, seek help from, but that would be the nature of my comment, is just having a little bit of a reality check on our timelines with anticipated reimbursements, and really, you know, expecting the worst in that sense as well, and that temporality. So, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, a question or comment? Either one.
The only thing I'm going to add to this is that there are thresholds that I have heard about the 75% reimbursement from FEMA, and the potential of up to 90%. But I've also heard the city of Napa had an earthquake about 5 years ago. It is my understanding, without verification, that they still haven't been fully compensated for the bill, so to speak, that they sent in for collection from FEMA. So I think that's probably more the norm than when you get it done and you send a report in that you expect to get full compensation, analysis and then full compensation quickly. And I don't see that as the norm in a relationship with a disaster to funding from FEMA. So we as a board need to do what is now being proposed in the short term and work diligently, as Director Ornstein mentioned, in getting our submittal into FEMA, verified by Ernst & Young, and then submitted and diligently pressed to get those funds back. But in my earlier comments, when I said I think we're only doing justice to say these are the hurdles that are in front of the water department in trying to get reimbursed, and we need to advise the city council that there's a possibility that we're going to come up short here and there. And right now, it looks like we're going to be okay, thankfully because of the reserves that we have. And then we'll work diligently to get reimbursed.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your presentation. Next, we have item 5.4, with fire recovery activities.
On this, we don't have a staff update, but there are a few things I just wanted to briefly note under this item. One, as I mentioned, March 27th, we're looking to set up the joint City Council BPU meeting. We'll be sharing in some detail the context that everyone's aware of, but more so the investigation, what we've done, how we've done it, what we've concluded at this point. We'll be bringing a couple of our national experts in to add to the discussion. We'll have our regulator partners there to be able to respond to questions. We'll also be talking about the repair. And that does seem, from a community standpoint, to be a dominant area of interest in terms of the impact. We all know folks are waiting on this, a number of folks, in terms of decisions to rebuild and how their insurance plays out. And there's a lot of work between now and the 27th, so I don't want to predict. I just say that there's growing indications that, as you would expect, on the complexity of this project, if in fact it is the complete replacement of the distribution system in the advisory area. And really, we'll talk so much more about it, but just complexities regarding it's in the middle of all these private contractors that are rebuilding homes, trying to maintain water to the 13 homes that are still there during the project, staging the project in a manner that ensures, as we charge different parts as we're bringing them online, we aren't cross-contaminating with the older version pieces we'll be taking out that will still be in operation. So just the point is, it is complicated, and I think there is some inevitability of impacts to schedules of some properties in the advisory area, but we'll get into more detail on the 27th with that.
Thank you very much, Director Hornstein. We have a consent item, consent calendar, item 6.1. The request to take that off the consent calendar? Or is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I would move to approve as presented.
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Unanimous. Okay, we don't have any report items. I see no public comments on non-agenda items unless any member of the public wishes to step forward. No referrals or written communications. Subcommittee reports? Do you have any subcommittee reports?
The Budget Review Subcommittee is busy, but as you've heard in earlier items, it's ongoing work, and we hope to come back, the joint meeting of the BPU and the City Council is trying to be set up for Tuesday afternoon, the 27th of March. And then we have the Budget Review Committee has a meeting the following day. So, and then there were the dates in that presentation that Ms. Zanino gave to where it'll come back to the BPU. So work in progress.
Thank you. No other subcommittee reports. How about board member reports?
Yeah, I just wanted to report that I was a part of the evaluation panel for the landscaping services RFP, and I think staff guided that conversation well. It was important to have it be a data-driven conversation based on our experiences with current contractors and the resumes of other applicants to the RFP, and I think that'll come to the BPU shortly. We do need to schedule a landscape ad hoc meeting still before it comes to the BPU, as I understand, but expect that that'll come back shortly to the full BPU.
Great, thank you very much. Director Hornstein.
Do have a few items, brief items. We wanted to share that we've been keeping the board up to speed on the incident we had with the Delta Pond that impacted our frost protection operation. That's now back to routine operation. It's 50% full, so unrestricted use in the normal sense. This does, even with the recent rain, as you're likely aware, it's been a fairly dry year. So we will be developing allotments for our ag customers, and all indications are they will be less than desired from the ag customer standpoint, but we'll do our best as we always do. We have a new online billing system going live in April to provide the ratepayers with a much higher quality tool for online payment. It's going to include a new kiosk for payments, including cash in the annex. Customers that use automatic bill payment, we'll have to work through. They're going to have to sign up again, but we'll be informing all the customers. But this new system has a higher degree of security and privacy for customers' information, so it was important to move it forward. We've been working, as we've shared at the fire updates, with the Army Corps and a supporting contract of the city to cap burn sewer laterals, particularly in certain areas where we have had the burn lift stations, Sky Farm A and Hansford Court collection basins there. And we are seeing success or reduction with these rains of inflow coming into the system. So we're pleased that's moving forward fairly successfully. We participated in St. Patrick's Day 5K this past Sunday as a kickoff to Fix a Leak Week. We gave out leak detection kits, and there seemed to be a lot of interest. It's March 19th through the 25th, so we're doing various social media information associated, and we'll be at the Home and Garden Show on the 16th providing information, similarly how to find and fix leaks. And lastly, as you may have seen in the radio and print media, there continues to be a lot of interest in this water contamination issue, and the latest will be this evening. I believe it's going to be a live on KTVU at the news this evening. You'll see someone familiar working through some Q&A.
Good. I look forward to your debut, on your television debut. And I'll get my recorder on so I can memorialize it for posterity. If there is no other business, another comment? Yes.
Just had a question about the new billing system. Is this in Spanish as well for our customers?
That would be a yes. I see a yes out there.
There will be a Spanish. There's a Spanish IVR that they can use, and then the billing system itself, the Spanish portion is not available quite yet, but they're working on that as well.
Great, good question. If there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.